Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive into something incredibly fascinating. We'll be synthesizing ancient philosophy, historical survival stories, and analytical psychology to discover exactly why our inner world is the ultimate sanctuary. We so often look outside of ourselves for control, meaning, and safety. But as history and psychology show us, true power is actually forged entirely from within. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the illusion of control, move right into surviving the crucible, explore apathy and emotional death, discover the ultimate human freedom, dive into the magic of synchronicity, and finally, we'll talk about finding your why. All right, let's jump straight into part one, the illusion of control and Epictetus's boundaries of fate. We're starting way back in the 1st century with Epictetus. He was an ancient Greek philosopher, but he actually spent his youth as a slave in Rome. So his perspective wasn't born in some comfortable academic tower, right? It was forged in literal chains. Looking up at the massive, unimaginable power of the Roman Empire, he realized a really fundamental truth about human suffering. As you can see broken down here, all external events are determined by fate, completely beyond our control. So suffering really only happens when we try to control the uncontrollable. Instead of focusing 100% of our energy on mastering our own internal responses, our actions, and our self-discipline. That brings us to section 2, surviving the crucible, and Viktor Frankl's test of meaning. Now, what happens when we take that ancient philosophy and test it in literally the most brutal crucible imaginable? Psychiatrist Viktor Frankl miraculously survived the Auschwitz extermination camps during World War II, and he documented not just the horrific physical torment, but the psychological sources of strength that allowed a very small fraction of prisoners to survive. He noticed that survival wasn't just a matter of physical toughness, it was deeply, profoundly tied to a prisoner's state of mind and their ability to find a purpose right in the middle of the absolute darkest modern evil. It really all boils down to this incredible anchor quote from Nietzsche that Frankl repeatedly referenced. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Survival wasn't just about scavenging food or medicine. It was about having a future to live for. Whether that was the burning hope of reuniting with a spouse or finishing their life's work, the people who kept a vision of the future alive were the ones who found the inner resilience to endure the unimaginable. But to really grasp the sheer power of that why, you have to understand the how. The camps aggressively, systematically stripped prisoners of their entire identities. They were left with absolutely nothing but their naked existence. Frankl himself lost his life's work, a scientific manuscript he had hidden in his coat, and he was reduced to nothing more than a number, 119,104. They took everything that defined a person from the outside. Let's move to part 3. Apathy and emotional death, exploring the psychological phases of a prisoner. Because of his psychiatric background, Frankl realized that the human mind reacts to extreme trauma in highly predictable ways. It creates defenses just to cope with the unthinkable. He mapped out the timeline you see here. First, there's the initial shock upon admission, where inmates delusionally hoped for a last-minute reprieve. That's followed by a necessary self-defense mechanism of complete emotional apathy as the brutal routine set in. And finally, for the lucky few, the psychology of release and liberation. Now, that middle phase, apathy, that was a literal protective shell. Without totally blunting their emotions to the death all around them, the prisoners' minds simply would have shattered. But here's the terrifying part about that second phase. If a prisoner gave up hope and stopped fighting, which was often signaled by something as simple as choosing to smoke their last hidden cigarette instead of trading it for food, they became known in the camps as a Muslim. And once that happened, their death was completely imminent. It was the ultimate tragic proof of Frankl's theory. Once that inner flame of meaning went out, physical death inevitably followed within days. Which leads us to section 4, the ultimate human freedom, the inner citadel. Right in the middle of the mud, the freezing labor, and the completely brutal selections for the gas chambers, Frankl discovered an indestructible sanctuary. He found the exact thing Epictetus had spoken of centuries earlier. He realized that even when you are treated like an animal, you still retain the ultimate freedom to choose exactly how you'll respond to your situation. Even walking to the gas chambers, a person could choose to be brave, dignified, and unselfish. That choice is the absolute last, unassailable human freedom. So how did Frankl survive? He retreated to his inner riches. You can see this beautifully in the dedication of his seminal book to the memory of his mother. It was this deep spiritual love for his family that kept his spirit continuously nourished, even while his physical body was literally starving. In the absolute bleakest environment in human history, his inner world was vibrating with love and beauty and art. It was a fortress that the guards could never, ever touch. Now, this brings us to a really provocative turning point in our explainer today. If our inner world is that powerful at shielding us from external horror, could it actually interact with and shape the external universe? I mean, if the mind is more than just a reaction machine, does it actually have a magnetic pull on the reality around us? Let's explore that in Part 5, Synchronicity and Carl Jung's A-causal connections. To answer that crazy question, we're turning to the brilliant psychology of Carl Jung and his concept of synchronicity. Jung defined this as an a-causal connecting principle. Basically, it's when a thought, a dream, or an emotion inside you perfectly matches up with an event in the outside world, creating this profound, almost magical connection without any logical cause and effect. You know that jarring moment when your inner reality perfectly mirrors an outside event and it makes you feel like the universe itself is winking at you? That's synchronicity. Think about it like this, especially in the context of love. A person might unconsciously project their ideal inner archetype onto a total stranger. This creates a magnetic pull and these seemingly impossible coincidences that make the whole encounter feel totally orchestrated by destiny. Jung argued that these aren't just random accidents. When our inner psychological energy is highly charged, it's like the boundary between our mind and the physical world becomes porous. The result? External events that literally feel destined to happen. And finally, we arrive at Section 6, Finding Your Why and Frankl's 3 Sources of Meaning. Here's the thing, whether you're facing the uncontrollable tragedies described by Epictetus and Frankl, or you're waiting for the meaningful, magical coincidences of Jung, your anchor absolutely must be your personal why. Without it, we're just getting tossed around by the whims of external fate. Frankl identified 3 very distinct ways we can forge this meaning every single day, through significant creative work, through deep love for another person, and finally, through the courage we show when suffering is completely unavoidable. Meaning is built through action, connection, and real resilience in the face of the storm. Frankl actually wrote, "The salvation of man is through love and in love." Think about how profound that is, coming from a concentration camp survivor. Through extreme deprivation, he totally transcended his physical suffering by realizing that love goes way beyond the physical person. It finds its deepest meaning in the spiritual, inner self. That pure, contemplative love provided him with total salvation. It is the absolute ultimate triumph of the inner citadel. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought to really reflect on in your own life. When the uncontrollable challenges of fate eventually arrive at your doorstep, what is the meaning you've built inside your inner citadel? Because as we've clearly seen today, the world can take away absolutely everything else, but that inner light, that is entirely yours to keep.